Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today we're looking at the 2009 collection, Spider-Man: Death and Dating. This is my 5th video in my series on the Brand New Day era for Spidey, so be sure to go watch the others if you want to be completely caught up. But just as a quick review, following the events of One More Day, Spidey's life has been turned completely upside down. His marriage to Mary Jane was retconned to have never happened, and he's become a wanted criminal as the primary suspect in the Spider-Tracer serial killer case. And also for being an unregistered superperson in the post-superhero Civil War era when unregistered superpeople are considered criminals, which has put him at odds on more than one occasion with the local registered superhero, Jackpot, who is not MJ. Don't even think about it. Lastly, his best pal Harry has mysteriously returned to life and is dating Lily, the daughter of mayoral candidate Bill Hollister, who Pete also has a bit of a crush on. The daughter. He has a bit of a crush on Lily, not Bill. I mean, I don't know, maybe he has a crush on Bill too. That man is some beefcake. Pete has been trying to avoid them both, though, ever since Lily kissed Pete in secret, and now Pete doesn't know what to do to prevent any issues between his friends. Oh, Pete. Still haven't learned how to try the Beyonders Think method, I see. That all, more or less, brings us up to date for this volume, Death and Dating, which features some of the most rotating creative teams we've had since the first few volumes of Brand New Day. So let's see what further hole these teams can dig our hero into and take this away. The comic opens on a rainy day, and Spidey's caught in it while trying to eat his lunch. He'd rather be dry, but at least he's alive, and as his fortune cookie suggests, maybe things are about to start looking up after someone's Metro Transit card gets stuck in his web umbrella. Now, being a Texan, I'm about as opposite of New York as you can get, so I don't understand anything about this transit card or how it works, but wouldn't Peter using it basically be stealing? The card has someone else's money on it that they apparently prepaid in order to use the subway, so he's basically using someone else's money without their permission to ride the subway? I get that he doesn't know the owner of the card, obviously, but can you not just turn the cards into the transit authority and have them maybe find the owner or refund the person or something? I'm definitely thinking about this way too much. It's really not important. The point is, Pete uses the card to try to catch the train so he can stay out of the rain, but a cop blocks him off the first car, despite it being mostly empty. Luckily, a woman helps him shove his way onto the overcrowded car next door, and the woman even seems to be coming onto him a bit when she reveals that she's a model whose modeling gig got cancelled, and is currently in need of a photographer to take pictures of her in her next to nothing outfit that she currently has on under her trench coat. Which, yeah. I think Mark Wade's been downloading a few too many casting couch videos from Kazaa, or LimeWire, or whatever people were using in 2009. The Parker luck holds out though, because Peter's spider sense starts a-buzzing. Yes, that's his spider sense. Get your mind out of the gutter. And he shoves his way back to the off-limits car just in time for the tunnel to collapse. As Spider-Man, he manages to hold up just enough of the tunnel to keep anyone from being crushed, but he now finds himself trapped underground with the occupants of that car, who turn out to be the jury for a case against a mafia man named Giacomo. And one of the jurors believes that Giacomo's boss, Carmine Carnelli, put out a hit on the entire jury. Spidey attempts to lead them out of the tunnel, but they're stopped by the tunnel collapsing, letting in the river water above. Spidey manages to dam the flow with debris and webbing, and they attempt to exit through a maintenance tunnel, but this time they're stopped by the Shocker! How shocking! Thank you. Shocker, with his vibro gauntlets, was able to engineer a fake earthquake and had stuck around to ensure that he had succeeded. He attempts to fight Spidey thinking he'll have the advantage in the cramped quarters, but Pete is able to crush his gauntlets, causing a feedback wave that knocks Shocker out, and doesn't hurt Spidey for some reason, but I'm sure it makes sense. Unfortunately, their fight also collapses the crawl space leading to the maintenance tunnel that Shocker was planning on using to get out. So Spidey puts on one of Shocker's gauntlets and uses it to clear a path. But without a ladder there anymore, Spidey is forced to rig up a pulley system and carry everyone all at once away from the flooding waters into the tunnel system. With the only light available being from Spidey's spider signal, which is already dying, Spidey is cast in darkness while he does his work. And when Shocker finally is pulled up and remembers he has a flashlight stashed nearby, he shines it on Spidey to reveal the webhead covered in subway rats attempting to abandon ship, so to speak. Aw, poor little guys. They're just freaked out. Don't let them bother you, Spidey. Just get them some pizza and they'll be fine. Shocker leads the way out of the tunnel until they spot some distant lights up ahead, meaning that a rescue team is coming to look for them. Only, Shocker still has one last trick up his sleeve and is able to remotely detonate the gauntlet that Spider-Man was wearing, causing yet another tunnel collapse in the hopes of finishing his mission while also letting him get away. But they finally get a bit of luck in the form of a ventilation shaft leading up to the surface. Spidey and the same juror from before help everyone crawl out of the shaft, but Spidey gets delayed when that juror slips under the still rising water. While Spidey would make the effort to save any of the trapped people, even the slimy mob lawyer guy, this particular juror has special importance. And not only because he's been the first one to jump in and help Spidey out the entire time, but also because this guy is one John Jonah Jameson Sr. That's right, the jolly old Jonah we're used to is a junior. JJJJ. More will be explained about this character in the future, but for now we mostly learn that he wasn't around to raise Junior, and instead the kid was raised by a stepfather, who is the person Jonah picked up his smoking habit from, and is also Senior's brother. Uh-oh, sounds like some family drama happening here. And Junior seems to be aware of his father's existence, and even his being in New York for the trial. We see our regular Jonah in the middle of divorce proceedings, because he's divorcing his wife after she sold the Daily Bugle out from under him to Dexter Bennett while he was in the hospital from the heart attack that Pete gave him at the beginning of Brand New Day. Again, you should have been following along with my videos or none of this is making any sense. But despite being in the middle of all those proceedings, the second he hears the news about the attack on the jury, he runs out of the building without a word. And we next see him as the survivors climb out of the ventilation shaft, waiting around in the crowd. Spidey attempts to introduce Junior to his long-lost pops, but Senior simply vanishes without a trace. But again, he'll be back. Before we move on to our next story, I do want to point out how artist Marcos Martin did a great job with this story. I love his use of panel layouts, using the tunnels as panel walls to help really push the claustrophobic nature of this story, which is made especially effective when we suddenly jump to Jonah Jr. in a much more open and empty office area. It's a very nice touch. And other moments like where he uses panels to highlight Jonah in the crowd at the end. It's a small detail, but something that not every artist would do. And it's really helpful to draw attention for the reader in a unique way other than just putting the detail front and center. And now, it's time to bring back Jackpot! We start here with a flashback to when Spidey went to confront Sarah Everett, or however you say that name, the secret identity Jackpot had given to Spidey. And while Sarah doesn't appear to be Jackpot, at the mention of the name, she does shut Spidey out and then goes to call up someone named Alana, demanding they meet. We'll get back to that. In the present, Spidey runs into Jackpot while he's stopping the attempted bank robbery of a villain named Blindside. He calls himself that because his touch can literally make people temporarily blind, which we learn when he succeeds at doing this to Spidey. Jackpot opts to rescue the blinded, unregistered Spider-Man instead of chase after the bad guy getting away with the money, which Spidey is probably less grateful for than maybe he should be, and Spidey then goes to Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four to analyze the toxin in his blood, allowing Reed to come up with a counter agent for it. Reed also learns that the neurotoxin Blindside uses is called Oedipus, nice, and made by Declan Industries. So Spidey seeks help from his old friend and Bugle reporter Betty Brant to investigate Declan. But this seems to just be a dead end, and is maybe only an excuse to call back to a previous Wolverine story where Wolvie had supposedly killed Declan. Now they're saying he had just stabbed Declan's eyes out. Yeesh, talk about your Oedipus. So Pete asks for an additional favor from Betty to use her contacts in the police to run a fingerprint from a coffee mug from a coffee Spidey had shared with Jackpot, leading him to one Alana Jobson. So Spidey goes and creeps on Alana's home, And between the empty vials he finds in her drawer, and the weird track marks he ends up spying on her back when she comes home, because again, being a bit of a creeper there, Spidey, it becomes quickly apparent, and she confesses to the fact almost immediately, that she's using drugs like mutant growth hormone to give her powers, because she apparently doesn't have powers normally, though Sarah Arrett does. I still don't know how to say that name. As we'll learn, Sarah sold her jackpot identity to Alana after Sarah completed the initiative training and then decided the superhero life wasn't for her. Spidey doesn't want to encourage someone who is both an amateur and who has no actual powers, so he demands the case files she has built on Blindside and tells her that she needs to stop. And I'm sure she'll totally listen to you, Spidey. Apparently, Alana had done all the work Spidey needed, and he's able to simply go straight to Blindside at his home. Only there he discovers that Blindside has a date. Another supervillain named Commanda from some mid-90s Spidey comics. But Spidey gets his own backup in the form of Jackpot. 'Cause obviously. Who attempted to show up to catch the bad guy to prove to Spidey that she really can do this. Blindside manages to blind her, but not Spidey, since Spidey has Reed's antidote, and Spidey slips some of the antidote to Jackpot as well, and together they're able to take out the villains. Only, on the way out, Jackpot collapses and dies. It seems with all the drugs in her system, the addition of getting the Blindside neurotoxin pushed her over the edge and gave her a heart attack, bringing an apparent end to Jackpot. Spidey goes to Sarah to tell her what happened and say that this is really her fault, since she's shirked the responsibility of being a superhero, and that people like them don't really get to choose not to use their powers. Power and responsibility and all that. Spidey leaves, but Sarah takes a look at the Jackpot outfit after he's gone, meaning we maybe haven't seen the end of a certain red-headed hero just yet. The next story brings back The Blank, a villain from the very first West Coast Avengers series. He was a random person that had the great fortune of having an excited scientist tell him all about his new invention before stepping in front of a car. As the scientist lay dying, the Blank grabbed the invention and ran, using it to make himself essentially untouchable. Attacks and even Spider-Man's webs just slide right off of him. And he uses this great power to rob banks, and I guess has made quite a name for himself doing so. And while he may not be the Robin Hood hero he's made out to be, it does seem that his reasons aren't entirely bad. After the last appearance he ever had, like 30 years before this, the belt that gave him his power was fused to him, and now he's losing control over it. He needs an expensive operation in order to save himself before he loses all control, which is why he's going around robbing banks. But it seems he'll never really get the chance because Spidey is dead set on catching Blankety Blank after one of his bank robberies nearly threatened Aunt May. And Spidey does end up catching him by simply surrounding him in webbing so that he had nowhere to run or means to slip away, bringing that plot to a quick close. Next we see Spidey getting caught in a trap laid by the Spider Tracer Killer, who planted one of the tracers on one of his victims and then activated it, then called the police so that they arrived at the scene at the same time Spidey did, seemingly perfectly framing Spidey as the killer. Frustrated, Pete decides to accept an invite from Harry Osborn to leave town and go and visit Liz Allen. Liz was Harry's wife when he was alive the first time, but when he returned from the dead, they didn't get back together. And since the comic has to explain that, we finally get the explanation of just how the previously dead Harry Osborn is back now. And if your guess is Goblin Serum, yeah, it's Goblin Serum. Just like with Harry's no longer dead old dad, the serum that originally supposedly killed Harry would eventually bring him back to life. And Norman, who had already returned from the dead and was running a secret criminal empire from Europe, paid Mysterio to fake Harry's death even further, apparently allowing many of the events we saw in previous Spidey comics to still transpire, like Harry's funeral and whatnot. Harry then was secretly moved around Europe from rehab clinic to rehab clinic until he was gaslighted into believing that his time as the Green Goblin was just a drug-induced hallucination. However, when Norman went a bit crazy during the New Ways to Die story arc, dressing back up as the Green Goblin again, the memories came flooding back to Harry. After he finally returned from Europe, Harry has been trying to do the right thing by his friends and family. That apparently includes rebuilding Peter's childhood home, Aunt May's house in Forest Hills, which had been destroyed during J. Michael Straczynski's run on Amazing by a former friend of Peter's, Charlie Wiederman, after he had become a new version of the Molten Man. This story seems to contradict One More Day, where Peter and May were shown already living in the house when Harry returned from Europe, so Harry couldn't have greeted them with their restored house because he was dead at the time, but I'm sure it all works out somehow. Speaking of Molten Mans, Liz's brother, Mark Raxton, is the original Molten Man, a reformed criminal who has been a very supportive brother for Liz for a long time now. But recently his powers have become more unstable, and Liz has been having to keep him in a special chamber in her house and is forced to take care of him, which is extra difficult to do with little Normie around. Also difficult since Harry's life insurance that she was using to pay for that care dried up when it turned out he wasn't, dead. Which is why Harry is on the way to meet her now. But things don't go as smoothly as Harry had hoped when he shows up. His own son is afraid of his zombie dad, Liz isn't exactly happy with any of his actions, and worst of all, Marky Mark, tied up down in the basement, decides he's had enough of the pain Harry has brought to their family and goes on the attack. He breaks free of his cage and burns down Liz's house, forcing everyone to flee outside. Pete runs off to find help, doing a quick change to Spider-Man to keep Raxton busy while Harry goes for his own solution, which involves a crazy spear gun looking thing. Liz isn't thrilled by the idea of Harry shooting her brother dead, but he promises that's not his goal. Instead, he's developed a cure, which he could prove if the man, Spider, and Molten would just stay still. The cure was apparently developed by testing on the other Molten Man, Wiederman. And you thought I mentioned him for no reason, didn't ya? Raxton ends up getting so molten that he melts the asphalt and gets himself trapped in it. Spider-Man, trusting that Harry is telling the truth about the cure, takes the delivery device from his pal and injects Molten Man with it while telling him to chillax. Which, yeah, I can admit that's kinda cringe, but it's not as cringe as they seem to be trying to make it out to be. The cure seems to have worked as well, and was another reason Harry was visiting Liz. The third and final reason appears to have been to get the engagement ring he had used to propose to Liz. Seems Harry's planning on solidifying his relationship with Lily Hollister. Wonder how that'll work out. Speaking of developments, the bookie who had been investigating the Spider Tracer killings for our hero has apparently finally figured out who the killer is. Only the killer seems to have known Bookie was investigating him and shows up to take him out before he can reveal anything to Spidey. But at least Bookie can go to his maker knowing he was right. We have one final story in the collection that focuses on Betty Brant. Her birthday is coming up and Pete's supposed to be in charge of getting some party up and running for her, which is a problem because she's worried he's a bit unreliable. In the meantime, Betty attempts to play matchmaker a bit, trying to set up Pete with a friend of hers, and also has him go speed dating with her. Do people still speed date, or is that just Tinder now? She also runs across J. Jonah Sr., told ya he'd be back, and ends up liking him so much that she plays further matchmaker and gives him Aunt May's number. Will something ever come of that? Yeah, it will. In the end, the party doesn't happen, and though Pete tries to keep Betty's spirits up with dinner and a movie, she thinks it's his fault that no one showed up for her birthday. Instead, it was that no one agreed to show up because everyone's kinda mad at her currently. Aunt May was mad at her for writing a hit piece on Martin Lee during New Ways to Die, something demanded by her boss at the DB. Harry's mad at her for similarly writing negative press on Bill Hollister, and the other former Bugle staff are mad at her because she alone didn't drop the DB and go to work for Frontline like everyone else. So Betty realizes that Peter really is a good friend after all, because while he might not always be on time, he is always there for her no matter what. And on that sweet note, we'll drop into the breakdown. As with most of the Brand New Day era, these stories are pretty underwhelming, even though they present us with some fairly major developments. John Jameson Sr. will be a fairly major side character from here on out, the big change to Jackpot with the tragic death of Alana, and the reveals we finally get for Harry's history all seem like they should be fairly epic moments. But instead they just feel a bit brushed over. I think the problem with this rotating teams thing that they were doing for Brand New Day is that it didn't feel like anything was really building towards anything. Essentially, each creative team would have the things they liked to focus on, and everything else fell by the wayside until the creative team that cared about that bit brought it back up. Essentially, this still felt like 3 or 4 different Spider-Man titles where we were forced to read through all of those titles in order to continue to any of the parts that we might actually care about. I'm also normally a big fan of stories that are told from perspectives other than the main characters, giving us a twist on how we view our main characters. And the Betty story, I guess you could say, does a fairly good job of that. But I do feel like knowing that both pushing Betty to be good friends with Pete again and these alternate perspective stories were a big part of Spidey editor Tom Brevoort's Brand New Day pitch and something he was really wanting to see done during this era. I feel like those kinds of stories work better when they come about a bit more naturally, when the writer feels that there's just no other way to tell the next part of the story other than to tell it from this other perspective. Whereas this Betty story feels like it comes out of nowhere and is shoved in just so we can have a point in the story that goes, oh, by the way, these two are good friends again. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of medium. It's not that they're bad stories. As far as Brand New Day goes, these are actually pretty good, but there's nothing particularly inspired or exciting here either. The collected edition gets 1. Busted Up Shocker Gauntlet, which is, bad, but I guess not all the way bad. I mean, they're still usable. And that translates to this collection having 6 issues plus 1 annual, a couple alternate covers in the back, and that's it. Certainly not the worst collection of all time, but Marvel just really did not feel all that invested in this era of Spidey comics. Thanks everybody, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Got more Spider-Man coming for you throughout September because that's Spider-Man month here on this channel. So I hope you like Spidey as much as me. There will also be more Marvel coming, and we'll get back to the New 52, and in October we'll probably do some horror stories because, Halloween. Got more Marvel Zombie requests, so probably be covering some of those if I can. So if there's anything you'd like to see me cover, then make sure to comment below. And if you did like this video, or you're looking forward to any of that, or you're just burdened with heavy responsibility, then be sure to click the like and subscribe and all of those things so you can help the channel out. And so you can help yourself to be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.